Hello, and welcome to another Infinity the Game Battle Report. As you might already deduce, this is not a tabletop simulator commentated game. Rather, these are pictures I've taken of a game I played in my own home this weekend with a good mate as part of a recording for a challenge issued by the Loss of Lieutenant podcast, which we can see here in all of its unadulterated glory. So this is something Loss of Lieutenant guys are trying to do. For those of you who aren't familiar with them, they're an Australian-based Infinity the Game podcast based out of Melbourne, and really a wonderful bunch of blokes. And they've started doing what they're calling monthly challenges. This month, the month of May, is the 16-inch challenge. It reads as follows. For the month of May, play games using weapons with no better range bands than those of a rifle. This means no Spitfires, HMGs or snipers. They will allow the use of profiles with secondary weapons with better range bands, such as Blitzens, Flash Pulses, etc., but you can't use those weapons in game. Grenade launchers are also out. The intention of the challenge is to get people thinking about positioning and mobility to get the most out of shorter range bands, rather than just sitting back and shooting your opponent at range. And they've basically asked people to tell us what they found, if they discovered anything new, what tricks and strategies were discovered to overcome your opponent. You'll also see here the request for battle reports with pictures and army codes be sent to lossoflieutenant@gmail.com. I have Kev's okay to do this up as a video and submit it that way. Thank you very much, Kev. So with that in mind, the idea being that we had to limit ourselves to range bands equivalent to those of a rifle, I returned to Tohaa. This is the list that I ran. Now Tohaa are an army that I played extensively in N3, including some of my best tournament results were with Tohaa. But I've not played them a great deal in N4. A little bit. I think they're probably really good. But of course, they were one of the later releases in N4, and I haven't really quite sunk my teeth into them yet. And when I have, I've built pretty cookie-cutter lists that you'd almost see sort of harkening back in some extent to N3 lists. But in N3, I actually really liked running Tohaa as a very short-range, very aggressive faction advancing under Eclipse, and I thought this challenge might be an opportunity to return to that and see if the style held up in N4. There are some differences between N3 and N4 that make it a little bit more challenging. One of the biggest ones, perhaps not surprisingly, is that McCall's lost stealth, and the reactive dodge changes really affect how closing to melee works. But Tohaa's short-range firepower is otherwise all still intact, and the fact that Tohaa have got an absolute surplus of Eclipse in their list, even more now in N4 than they did in N3 thanks to the change to Mirror Ball, meant that I thought it would be pretty interesting to return to. So this is the list. It's basically built around three very similar triads. I've got 3 Sukhwhale forward observers with K1 combi rifles, each with either a Kael'tar or a Kamel paramedic and a McCall. That's 9 of my troops accounted for. Otherwise, I filled the list out with a Chaxa Auxiliary, a Labertos Minelayer, a Kerael Preceptor, Jan Star, a Diplomatic Delegate, and a Taquiel Lieutenant with +1 order, who does not deploy in a triad. You can fake it out, but really he should be run unlinked. And this is quickly becoming one of my favorite profiles and ways to play it in N4, actually. The Taquiel is just tremendously useful, and running it as a +1 order Lieutenant basically injects 2 very useful orders into your second combat group, or first if you put it there, without the need to include a very expensive Ektros NCO. So a lot of the tools here, I think, to run basically to play a short-range game. We'd agreed that we would roll up a random selection, run it from a random selection of scenarios that included Firefight and Decapitation, and so the list is kind of built accommodating some of those. Firefight, among other things, meaning that you need specialists to do classifieds, but you need to try and have your specialists be survivable. I've probably slightly overdone it here. I think if I'd thought a little bit more about that scenario, that delegate would not be a specialist, she'd be a journalist, because there's no need to give your opponent another specialist kill, which would end up biting me in the ass, actually. But the desire to make this list a bit more generalist ended up hurting me, although not irreparably. My opponent, for his part, played Ikari Company. Ikari I feel like a slightly unexplored army in N4, but I've been playing a few games with them recently, and for the right missions, they absolutely slap. They've got a lot of the strengths of JSA, with some things that JSA can't do. You can link a Tanko with a Kaisotsu core, which JSA can't do. You've got Tanko Harises with a Daiokai, which is exceptional. And you've got access to some other tools, including a lot more smoke thanks to Desperados. You probably shouldn't play Yarn Yarns in N4, but you should play Desperados. They're very good. And having access to just more reliable smoke radically changes the game. So this is my opponent's list. Bearing in mind, of course, I didn't know what was in this list until he went ahead and deployed it. But he's got a Keisotsu Corps with a Brawler Lieutenant and a Keisotsu Paramedic. The Brawler Lieutenant was a nod to Decapitation, if we played that, where he wanted to have a more survivable lieutenant in his link without going overboard trying to find one. Decapitation, of course, having reinforced tactical link. It would end up hurting him a little bit in this scenario, much the same way that I had stretched myself to get those extra specialists in there, but that was basically his choice, and I think it was unreasonable. Tanko Missile Launcher rounding out the core link, Haris of 2 Tankos with Flamen Spears and Contenders and a Daiyokai, Arushi, Yojimbo for a total of 10 in Combat Group 1, then a secondary possible Haris, which is a really interesting twist, with 2 cheap Wu Ming loadouts and a Clipper, a Ninja Killer Hacker, which I would not see until the very end of the game, and a Desperado. Immediately obvious in this list is that he has much longer range bands than I do, and much more Overwatch. Many of, like, almost every model in that list has got some Overwatch capacity at range. Multiple Flamen Spears, Panzerfausts, multiple Panzerfausts, the missile launcher. All of that meant that he would have, if he wanted it, range dominance almost until the end of the game, thanks to the restrictions I was playing under. But let's see how it went. So this is the table. What you can see here is my deployment zone. I won the roll, Whip 14 versus Whip 12. Whip 12 did not actually telegraph that the brawler was his lieutenant, because Keisotsu are also Whip 12, but I elected to go first, and I elected to go first mostly because Firefight is a 16-inch deployment zone scenario. I was geared for a close assault, and I had Janstar and Kael'tar specialists. My opponent elected to take the table edge on the far side of the map there, and I think that's with very good reason. Now, the picture is cutting it off slightly, but there is an incredible sniper tower here, very tall, just on the 16-inch line, and with some dominating fire lanes across the board. It's also got high ground here and over this bridge, with good fire lanes into the middle of the board, and it's got a decent sort of fort here with fire lanes down this way. Now, no individual position there can dominate the entire board, although this tower comes pretty close. But really some excellent high ground for him to use his weapons from here. Now, by comparison, one thing I do like about my deployment zone quite a lot is this elevated position here. And specifically, it's got a side corridor up the table that sort of runs along there that I could use, and lots of like nice cover moving in and around here if I wanted it. The rest of the deployment zone was reasonably defensible, nothing exceptional, and I've deployed very aggressively. You'll see some pictures of this in a tick, but there's one of my Group 1 triads deployed here, a Group 2 triad deployed here, another Group 1 triad deployed here. So basically there's a massive weight of Tohaa models in this space, all ready to push out if required. And then a little bit less slightly committed on this flank with the Kerail Preceptor, which is still a fair bit of force, and the Lobotos and its mine deployed down there. Now, under ideal circumstances, I'd actually quite liked to have had, and I think it would have been very useful, to have the lieutenant deployed kind of somewhere around here to be able to support the preceptors with his own mirror ball, but I wanted to do a fake out. And what I'd done is I'd spent a command token for an extra reserve drop. One of those reserves was the Kael'tar. Because I was reserving the Kael'tar, I'd end up deploy my lieutenant here so that it looked like it was part of an upcoming triad. Basically in order to kind of disguise the fact that a Kael'tar was still coming. Because one of the things, if you play against Tohaa, they reserve 2 models and there's a really obvious triad with a hole in it, there's a good chance that's a Kael'tar coming, which means that it's coming alongside something else, which we'll get to. So just a few close-ups. So if we go to here, it's doing something a little bit funky with the picture ordering, but here you can see my some of my army, and this is the Haris teams deployed. You'll also probably notice here that there's some combined army models there. This is because my Tohaa done up as Sigmar Trihedron, all done up in combined army colors, lots of Macri and Fracta bits and pieces, but you'll also see, I think you can see a couple of Dadarazi there playing. Those will be playing as McCalls, and of course Bit is playing as a diplomatic delegate. But yeah, we've got Silkwhale Commandos, Kael'tar Specialists, and here is the Lieutenant. So, If we tab back, we'll see some of my opponent's deployment zone. And this is where things started getting a little bit hinky for me. I'd expected, and I'd done a lot of my deployment predicated on the idea that this tower here would contain a Tanko missile launcher. And I was prepared to actually assault up these staircases if I had to. What I didn't expect was that he would deploy a linked Clipper drone bot there, and the Tanko on the far side of the board. So we can already see some pretty withering Overwatch coming in. So there's a Tanko here with Flamen Spear looking in this direction. There's the missile launcher Clipper looking straight down into my deployment zone. And then as we scroll, let's see, here we can see the Tankos. Now these would not end up being deployed in a link. He wanted the burst on the Clipper, which means these Tankos don't have cover. But they've got Flamen Spears looking out in all directions, and the Panzerfaust Red Fury, Marksman Daikai looking like so. And again, like my opponent looked at my deployment and immediately realized that I did not have any big guns. I had nothing beyond 16 inches. So he has straight up bald-faced placed these Tanko on Overwatch, which is going to do me a real mischief. And we can also see, his core has come down here. So Tanko Missile, Kasatsu Paramedic, there's the Brawler, Yojimbo, Rushi, Desperado, all of this business. On the far side of the map, which I think if we tab through, yeah, here we can see. So this is the map from a left to right perspective, and we can see how much my opponent is able to refuse to flank me, and really sort of not fully out deploy, but pretty significantly out deploy. I've deployed assuming that this tower up here would contain a great deal of his strength, and instead he's put a disposable Haris up there. All of my triads with 16-inch range guns are on this side of the table, and his core, Lank, and lieutenant are over here. So this is an excellent deployment. He's also got a center of strength with the potential Tanko Haris that can move out in any direction. So I like this deployment a lot. I was able to counter a little bit with my reserve drops here. So I mean the Specialist has just gone down over here somewhere and joined the Haris. This is Jan Star. And Jan Star is deployed out of impersonation state with a Symbio bomb and a Symbio mate, which means that he's still got the advantage of impersonation to deploy very aggressively, but he's packing Ferroware and a Symbio mate to get him through some trouble, which is basically I'm really going to rely on him to do work on the first turn, and we'll see what he does. My opponent's reserve is the Rushi, which has gone down here, and from the way that he looks at my force, he makes the deduction that I may well have a Tagma Schema, which is always a pretty reasonable deduction to make against Tohaa. And so rather than risk trying to strip orders from one of my groups and only taking away one, he instead puts the Rushi in suppressive fire, I think quite reasonably, on the grounds that the only smoke I have on this flank is the Preceptor, which the Rushi does not give two shits about. And this is a really nice range band for suppression. So the Rushi basically is set up to deny the advance of these disposable skirmishers in concert with the Tanko missile launcher and the two bikes. So I'm going first. Now I think we'll end up coming back to this slide at least once during the battle report because it's very, very useful. But in short, I had a lot that needed to be done in order to make any kind of progress this turn. I'm lucky in the sense that I've got my full 17 orders, but I have to make a great deal of use of them because I have to go to my opponent. And if we look at the angles down the board he's got, this Clipper drone bot's got massive lines down here and here. The Tanko's got massive lines there and there, and the central Haris is supporting both of them. So, and then of course the Rushi is in suppressive. So withering fields of fire, and any one individual attack is going to be quite challenging. I start with an attack on this flank here. So basically what I decided that I need to do is step one, remove the Clipper drone bot up in this tower so that any attack into this portion of the table only has to contend with things that are close. I don't have to worry about a burst 2 24-inch range missile launcher cleaning up something that moves into this space, basically reducing the risk that I can. To do that, I've got to close within 16 inches to make good use of my guns, and that's where the Tack Whale Lieutenant comes in. So if we tag left, we'll already see what's going on here. So Mirror Ball is a zone of control smoke grenade. It's like if a jammer married an eclipse grenade, and it is excellent. It's only one burst, obviously, but it's on whip 14 and it has all of the usual properties of smoke. And so what's happened is that the lieutenant here has moved out just a little bit, avoiding the line of fire of the clipper. And it's dropped a clip zone down there. Now I had to get this just right, and basically what I've done is I've dropped it down, just about managed to eyeball it, so that a Sook whale can touch cover here and then move out to here. Leave the smoke and engage the clipper. And that's basically what happened. We might have a shot of it on the next slide. Yeah. So here's what's happened. The smoke's been moved because we're faffing around with things. But basically the Sook whale has gotten up to this cover, left the smoke just barely, gotten into line of fire of the clipper, and had a gunfight. So this is basically about a 15-inch range gunfight. I've moved it. This is basically a stage photograph, but I was able to hug the cover and just not quite see the wooming up here. But have a face-to-face roll with the clipper. I think it took 2 orders, but I took it out, and then move further this direction to see this this wooming with Panzerfaust, engage him under 16 inches as well, do 1 wound, which, you'll take, it's a heavy infantry. K1 is a fine weapon to engage an armor 4 heavy infantry though, and he dropped prone. So it took sort of both lieutenant orders to get the smoke down, then orders to move forward, orders to engage, but this little team here is able to destroy the clipper and drop the wooming prone, which clears the path for an attack on the other flank. Didn't have to use the Symbiomate, which is well and good. Would probably have been doable much more efficiently with a longer range weapon, but needs must. Yeah, and here we can see the engagement against, moving forward to have the engagement against the wooming Panzerfaust. So then we get to the engagement on the right flank. So already in this picture you can see the Libertos has moved up and Janstar has re-impersonated. That is something that you can do. You have to be not in a marker state in order to be given the Symbiomate and Symbiobomb, but nothing stops you then re-entering a marker state, which is very, very useful. So Janstar and the Libertos have moved forward, and they will assault up into this location. Just going to tab through really quickly. Yeah. So what is going to happen here is, because they're in different groups, Janstar is in group 2, Libertos is in group 1, the Libertos' job really is just to suicide. It's to come this direction up here, ideally take out the Rushi, and then whatever else it can, just to make Janstar's run here as easy as possible. What you want to do is you want to eliminate as many of the AROs in this sort of space as you can, just to increase your likelihood of survival. Janstar's got a Symbiomate and is in impersonation state, so he's got multiple backup situations for things that go wrong. But particularly if enough templates hit you, and of course remember there is a Tanko with a Flamen Spear just up there, you'll be in a situation where you can't survive everything. So what will end up happening is actually the Libertos will get lucky as sin. It moves forward. It moves through line of fire of the Tanko sort of here, and then gets in under the shadow of the building with a move which discovers it, but then it's able to activate in this position here. So it's spending a new order here. Now it's in this shadow of the building, so the Tanko can't see it. It's in this shadow of the building, so this Tanko can't see it. So it's only in line of fire of Yojimbo and the Rushi, and it's in the back arc of this Desperado. So it activates, it actually ends up moving in this direction, but only 2 things can see it to start with, the Rushi and Yojimbo. With a shotgun, armed with a shotgun, the Rushi elects to sacrifice its life and fire suppressive, and Yojimbo elects to dodge on the grounds that I'm probably going to template because the Rushi has fired suppression, so he wants Yojimbo to live, which is actually a pretty good rationale. One of these 2 had to fire, and Yojimbo has very low odds of killing the Libertos because it's got dogged, whereas the Rushi does. What ends up happening is that the Rushi whiffs two of its 3 shots, and I pang my armor roll, which means that Libertos lives, gets over here, and is not dogged at all. And 2 template weapons knock out the Rushi, which is excellent, basically. It'll faff around a little bit more, it'll take some shots. It won't I think it might, yeah, it ends up knocks the Libertos unconscious, so the Desperado unconscious, and that's it. That's all of the orders I've got left, basically. So it'll end up here, alive with 2 kills to its name, which is really, really good. Although to note, the Desperado is just unconscious, not dead. That will come up. Yojimbo lives, he dodges through everything, but I've taken out 2 of the pieces that I need to make an attack run. And an attack run I do. So here we can actually see the end state, bit of a spoiler. But what happens is that Janstar moves all the way up to here. And along the way, he engages multiple different things. Now you can see at this point, both the mate and the bomb are missing. What's happened is that he's used impersonation to move in under line of fire of the Tanko, both Tanko, just like the Libertos did. Then he's moved to engage Yojimbo. Yojimbo has nanopulsed on the grounds that he has to strip the symbiote somehow. I have viral pistoled and I've killed Yojimbo. Yojimbo is not shock immune, but it's also 3 viral pistol shots, and Yojimbo doesn't have cover. It was going to kill him anyway. That takes 2 orders, I think. There might be like some dodging or some contender fire first before he just goes and nanopulses me. I end up in a situation where I think I also have the Tanko that's up here. I end up having because he's not in cover, because he's impetuous, even though he's on higher ground, I end up having a like 12-inch range viral pistol shot with him. Engagement with him. And I do a wound before I give up and like, no, I've got more important things to do. And in particular, I've got 1 order left and I make this play. Here is Janstar, and here is my opponent's unconscious Brawler Lieutenant. I've dropped him with Endgame from the Symbiote Bomb. Single use effect. It's 2 dice on 13s versus 1 dice reset on 9s. It's got a decent chance of penetrating. If it does, it's armor piercing damage 13. The Brawler does have BTS 3, but I land 1 hit through his reset and he fails his save. This is basically the last order of the turn for practical purposes and is super, super significant because it means he is in. Firstly, I have a Lieutenant unconscious on the board, which if he doesn't bring it back will give me Lieutenant kills at the end of the game. Secondly, he's loss of Lieutenant. There is no reinforced tactical link in Firefight. There is in decap. For reference, I don't have Chain of Command either. I'm running the same risk. Chain of Command is very expensive. So this is a really, really good kill. And if we tab through, yeah. So this is functionally the last order of the turn that I have and has put my opponent in loss of Lieutenant. So I've killed a few models. We can see the unconscious Rushi, the unconscious Desperado. There's a couple of wounds on the heavy infantry. All in all, this is a really, really good first turn, making extensive use of marker states and eclipse zones to advance with an army that otherwise doesn't have a lot of long-range firepower. We will see in a bit or I'll tab back to that overlay. And in fact, I wonder if I can do this. Yeah, so if we just look at this really quickly, this is the game as it's sort of the deployment. We'll come back to this at least once more. But if I had just taken a sniper, this building here had a 44-inch range sniper shot into this Tanko. It could also have had an engagement under 24 inches with this Clipper drone bot. One sniper here could probably have accomplished in 3 or 4 orders everything that I took my entire turn to do. But it also might have catastrophically failed. That'll happen sometimes if you're fighting missile launchers. Tohaa have symbiomates, but you can't put symbiomates on everything. And if I'd put all of my eggs in this basket rather than moving in under smoke and marker states, who knows what would have happened. But yeah, I spent basically most of the game wishing that I had a sniper in this building because, yeah, 44 inches into this Tanko would really have been nice. But let's back up, take a look at how my opponent handled loss of Lieutenant. So first thing he did is this link is already broken because the Brawler is down. And he does not waste any orders. The Tanko is impetuous, so it impetuouses, comes down these stairs, and it will end up, let's see if we can flip through, it'll end up engaging and killing Janstar. Janstar has CC -3 and burst 2 viral pistols, but firstly the burst bonus doesn't work in close combat, and secondly he's not going to beat a Tanko in any case, so he gets monofilamented and killed. I think it takes 2 orders, but you know he was never going to survive in that location. Secondly, oh yeah, this is actually slightly earlier in the turn. We can see the Tanko here. He will engage. He will actually fire a missile into the now impetuous Libertos. And blow it straight to hell. So this is really good triage from my opponent. He's not able to do a ton else. A Wooming will go into suppressive fire. He'll move and then form back up the Tankos. We can actually see this Tanko here. Yeah, it's taken the wound last turn. It's moved up to engage the Libertos as well, and it's failed. But yeah, impetuous and irregular orders, without having to spend any command tokens, he uses to kill this Libertos. And then spending. Actually, I think it's just the irregular order. He moves in to engage and destroy poor Jan Star. So this is really good triage. These movements, just using free orders, irregular orders, conserving your command tokens, which he then uses to form some links back up, accomplish a few other things. Those are really his only kills this turn. But as far as triaging through a lost turn goes, it's pretty good, and it's a game of two halves. So again, this is just looking back to this game state. So if we look, relative to the first turn, all of these resources I have are now dead. All I have on this flank is the Preceptor, but my team has moved up to here and engaged here. So let's have a look at. Yep. So this is the primary offensive operation on the second turn. So if we tab back to here, in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the position that I've built here, and I'm going to extend it further forward. I want to push in this direction and this direction. And this is actually where I rediscovered something that I had learned during N3 and kind of just let lapse a little bit, which is that when you are beginning an assault run that relies on smoke, it is a really, really good idea to just plot your grenades. Stop, spend a minute, look at the lines on the board, and figure out where you have to lay your smoke to block line of fire. A line laser is really useful for just looking at enemy lines of fire. You aren't allowed to. You are not allowed to just place smoke to see where you have to go to block. But if you can get a good enough eye and you check your opponent's line of fire, which you totally can do, you literally do it by looking at the table. You could usually get a good idea of where you need your smoke to go down with reasonable accuracy to let you advance the way that you want. So I stopped here, I plotted out my smoke, and then I went about laying it to launch an attack. And again, the Tack Whale Lieutenant doing God's work here. So basically, most of the smoke that you'll see this turn is going to be laid by the Tack Whale. It moves up here and mirror balls this one down, and then it will also, I think, end up laying a smoke grenade sort of somewhere down here in order to let this team advance, because there's lots of guns coming in this direction. So I need to obscure basically all of this line of fire in order to let this team advance around this way. And if we tab through, yeah, here we can see. So this is where the smokes ended up going down. This is this one you saw in the previous one, and then this template's been dropped as well. And thanks to Mirrorball not leading line of fire and 2 lieutenant orders on the Tack Whale, it just did that. It just did that with that group's orders. And so what's happened is that the Sook Whale has been able to break this cover, and it needed to do that because this is more than 16 inches. So it's broken cover here, moved up this direction to see this Tanko. And so again, what we've got here is another 16-inch range gunfight between a linked K1 combi rifle and a Tanko. Now, in this instance, the Tanko's contenders are paying dividends. I really like light shotguns on the Tanko if I can. I think it's a premier assault weapon for its cost on a heavy infantry. And what you really want to be doing with that link is having the Daiokai lay down fire while the Tanko cover ground to assault with the shotguns in their close combat. But in this case, as a defensive setup, the 16-inch range bands on the contenders were consistently relevant. So kind of fair enough, I guess. But after several orders, what happens is that the Sook Whale is able to either wound or drop unconscious the Tanko. This guy, Wu Ming with Panzerfaust, will stand back up with a dodge. She'll engage and shoot him to death as well, but she will lose her symbiote to a shotgun in the process. Which, again, fair enough. You've got to strip the symbiote somehow, and a template weapon stands among the best chance of actually punching through the symbiote and doing damage in the same hit. And Sook Whale Commandos, losing mimetism when they transmute, great option to do. So in this instance, she made her save. But so some good triage in this situation, but she does eventually push through. And this is how I functionally end the turn. This triad, they'll all be prone, you can only see the couple of markers there, but this triad has pushed all open to my opponent's deployment zone. They are hanging out on these stairs and prone here. Kael'thas is just kind of along for the ride, providing burst bonuses. The game is really all about the Sook Whale and the McCall. And they've knocked out 2 heavy infantry. There's still a Wu Ming in suppression up here, and a bunch of Tanko and Daiokai in this direction, but I got some kills. And that's kind of all that I accomplished, which is not a great deal. And I could already feel like there was some movement. The Preceptor moved up a little bit, etc. But with my opponent staying in his deployment zone for a second turn, there was never a situation where my opponent extended or overextended into the midfield. And one of the things that this kind of rifle range band list really wants your opponent to do is extend into the midfield. Engaging the enemy deployment zone with rifles is a challenge. Engaging the enemy midfield with midfield with rifles is much easier. So a bit of a struggle, actually. I think I had to play into almost, in a weird kind of way, loss of lieutenant on my opponent's part was a real challenge for me to recommit to an assault on my second turn. But we took out 2 heavy infantry for no losses ourselves, hunkered back down. Basically, that's pretty okay. So here on my opponent's second turn, this Desperado has blitzed forward because she may as well, got her impetuous order. How has she blitzed forward? She's blitzed forward because my opponent on his turn with his paramedic stood her back up. Must have been something that I missed. She's Fizz 13. He took the shot. He made it, which is just as well because he certainly didn't revive his brawler. His brawler went down for the count when he got a metadart fired into his ass, which was good for me because I meant that lieutenant kill was now on the books, period. But the Desperado coming back presented my opponent with a renewed resource on this flank. So she's moved forward. She's actually moved forward impetuously and dodged the pulsar from this Symbio Beast. And my opponent has then activated his core link, and he's from this position downtown. It's about 20 inches away. The Tanko's fired a pair of missiles into the Symbio Beast. Back with his, he doesn't have core link bonuses in the sense of +3 ballistic skill, so he's hitting on 10s, but he does have a 3-person core link with just some Kaisotsu in him. The Beast has failed its dodge, and he's basically it's gone dogged. So that's the entire end of this turn, because anything else he does will give the Beast dodges to try and get forward and pulsar things. So he's just been like, cool, got my kill, that's all that's happening. The rest of his turn, however, is much more aggressive. And so here we can see a Tanko duo, because the Tanko Daiko duo. And I say duo, it's because this is these two here. The Tanko that was here is dead, because the K1 Sook Whale has killed it. And they are moving out aggressively. The Tanko is coming over this bridge. The Daiokai is moving out this way. It's actually got an NCO order now. And they will move up to here. It's moved all the way up. It's had to move into range of the zone of control. Let me see if I can get it. There we go. This has ended up being just about 8 inches when it pops up onto here to get line of fire. But it's BTS 3 and 1 dice, etc. It easily shrugs the Ferroware from my lieutenant. It can't get to my lieutenant, but what it can get to is this Kael'tar. So it moves up onto here, takes the shot. I think it ends up being at like 8.1 inches here, or at least he takes the shot from further back or something like that. But I'm out of cover. He gets the kill. Dead Kael'tar specialist. Fortunately not chain of command, although there was no way he could know that. He isn't quite... Basically, at this point, he could move up this direction to engage the McCall, or pull back. He's only got a couple of orders. He doesn't want to end up in the open, because he'd be surrounded. There's K1 rifles coming this direction, K1 rifles coming this direction, K1 rifles coming this direction. Doesn't want his armor 5 heavy infantry in that situation, so he pulls back. And that's like 2 kills in this turn, which is not a lot, right? Which kind of makes it seem astounding the game ends up being as close as it does. So back to this, just back to this starting point here, as we move into my final turn. The Desperado is back up. This link team is up to 3 and in shambles. These pieces are dead. This team is now down to just a Wuming and a duo of Tanko and Daiokai. And I, for my part, have lost the skirmisher elements that I extended on this attack, and I've lost 1 Kael'tar, which takes the Haris occupying this space down to a duo. Again, my opponent is basically just occupying this much of the board, with a Desperado hanging out here. He has not extended into the midfield. He's not moved into position where I can strike out of my deployment zone and jump on exposed pieces, which is what I want him to do. So he's playing a very cagey game, setting up for a last turn play. The only thing that I did not mention that I should have is that if we tab all the way back to this team here, I had 2 orders remaining with this team. 2 orders remaining with this team. they couldn't really take any gunshots. There were no targets. They did 2 classifieds. They did net undermine, and which is the veteran in your opponent's half of the table, and mapping, which is the forward observer in base contact with a terrain structure entirely in your opponent's deployment zone. So they've net undermined and mapped, mapping on this building here. Net undermined just by being in my opponent's half of the table. Pretty lucky, actually. Two whip 13 rolls succeeding both is a good gig. So we get back to this position, and I have most of my resources still stuck in my deployment zone. The Preceptor has moved out slightly at this point, so the Preceptor sort of like occupied this space just a little bit, which is good because my opponent's HVT is here, which will end up being very relevant. But there's still a Tanko missile launcher hanging out here. There's guns coming this way. I'm loath to spend tons of orders trying to smoke up with the Preceptor, and particularly since the Tanko is an obstacle that you can't just blow through with Pulsar templates. So I have to figure out some kind of an attack plan to get some runs on the board. And what we end up doing is this. So this is sort of like pie slicing with smoke. What's happened is that the lieutenant has dropped smoke in this position here, which has made this kind of a weird shape here. Smoke stops when it contacts terrain, and so there's sort of this like awkward smoke shape here, which has allowed one of the group 2, actually the group 2 K1 Sukhwhale, to move up to here under cover of smoke and then slide out like that to see the Tanko. And so, while hiding from the Dayakai. Now what I wanted to do, and was pretty aggressive, I only had so many orders, was I really wanted to put the wounded Tanko down and then put my fire onto the Dayakai, engage it from here and destroy it. But this is a case where you can't pre-measure, you can't pre-place your smoke, and the smoke ended up template being just not quite perfect. There was just a little bit too much, it wasn't quite in the right place, and so there was no easy way for me to move to engage the Dayakai in the orders that I had. Basically what I would have had to have done if I wanted to do it is break cover against the Tanko and still hope to kill it, then dismount here and move up to here and engage the Dayakai from there. And that was predicated on beating the Tanko when I did not have cover, which I really wasn't willing to do. It also would have given me exactly 1 order to try and kill a Dayakai, which was like, not a great play. It's still on, I think it's still on full health at this point. So I get, for all of that work, I mean, it's just Group 2 doing this work. It's just, again, more mirror ball. The lieutenant orders this game have been spent doing nothing but laying mirror balls, which is totally fine. You've got to get that smoke down somehow. It is super useful. 2 orders every turn for free off of this wonderful model. Sometimes it will do other things. If you've played against Tohaa, or if you've heard people talk about playing against Tohaa, sometimes the tack wheel does things where it just runs into the midfield and murders an entire link with Ferroware. It can do that. My opponent never gave me opportunity to this game, and also in this scenario there were lieutenant kills on the line. So it had to end every turn in a very defensible position, which is fine, right? If all it does is lay tons and tons of Eclipse smoke, that is still excellent. So the only other thing that this link does is press the button, pull out some grenades. I think it may even have been the lieutenant that did that, opening the panoply on his way out of that field, grab some grenades off the panoply and get me 1 panoply activation on the board. Group 2, and here we have some horrible resolution pictures, but Group 2 began its assault and its attempt to get my final classified. So I wanted to come around here, engage and kill in melee the Wu Ming, and then move in this direction. I couldn't because the Dayakai had this line on lockdown. So we did something else instead. We moved further up the stairs, moving, not using stealth. My opponent elected not to break suppression fire. And this got us just out of the Dayakai's line, which was there. And then with their next order, a long skill jumped. You might be able to see the line of fire on this guy is something like that. They've both jumped down into his back arc. As a long skill, nothing else is watching them, so they're ready to make the assault. This ends up being a bit of a comedy of errors. He makes his dodge against my jump. He pulls back this direction, breaking suppressive fire. He's got a chain rifle. I charge. He ends up, I move down the stairs. He chain rifles me. I shoot him with the K1. He makes both of his saves. I make both of my saves and I do no wounds to him, completely ineffectual, and then I activate again and I charge down the stairs and he puts chain rifles into me again and the Sukwale gets wounded and the Macaw gets absolutely blitzed, but I kill him in close combat. So that's one close combat skill. Every remaining order that I have is spent running the Sukwale this direction into close combat with this Tanko and slapping a D-charge on it to kill it. I think it's just, and it was a coup de grace, right, which kills. To get that kill counted as a melee kill, so that I had 2 melee kills on the board, which did my third and final classified Predator. That's my last order of the turn. The game is going to end up being really, really close, which is pretty astounding, all things considered, because I feel like I've done fairly well to this point. So what we might do is we're just going to jump all the way back to this position here. So at the end of this turn, I've got a Sukwale hanging out up here. They're like basically the bleeding wreckage of a triad around here, and a wounded Sukwale in this corner, and like nothing here for love or money except for 1 Preceptor. My opponent is going to end up making basically a really good play. What's going to happen is that the remains of this Tanko link are going to move all the way up to here. This is my HVT. He's going to get enfilade fire down there into my Sukwale and start tearing me up and just do like 2 classifieds in a couple of orders. So we tab back through. So here's the enfilade fire, and you can see just in the distance there's my Sukwale commando, and he's putting missiles. I don't even elect. I've got link bonuses. I don't even elect to respond to this with link bonuses because this is a gunfire happening at like 34 inches, so it's -6 range band for a rifle. Again, if I'd been a sniper, that'd be really good, but I'm not, so I can't. It takes him 2 orders, but he eventually puts a missile into that unsymbiomated Kael'ta, so Sukwale, and blows her all the way to dead. That's a specialist kill, and there have not been a lot of those yet. He also, if we tab back to here, moves his Desperado up and pulls something out of the panoply. And then with the 1 order he has in Combat Group 2 otherwise, this ninja finally reveals. It's been hanging out the entire game, and it reveals, and it data scans the Symbio Beast. He's on a 13, I'm on a 12. I don't believe surprise applies to attempt to do a classified, but he succeeds and gets data scan. He then, you can see here, this link team's moved forward. They will also end up pulling things out of panoplies, and the Tanko gets follow-up, and the Tanko also secures my HVT. And that's it. It's the entire end of the game. Yeah, here we can see the ninja getting data scan. So there are my classifieds. Which means when the chips were down, the score was incredibly close. So thanks purely to that kill he got on the Forward Observer Sukwale, he'd killed more specialist troops than me. I'd killed none, he'd killed 1. I'd killed his Brawler Lieutenant, and he'd never gotten to my Tac Whale, which meant that I had 2 points for the Lieutenant kill. I also had more Army points. He had more panoplies, weapons pulled from panoplies, thanks to getting a couple on the last turn, and we'd each done all 3 classifieds. I'd done all 3 of mine, but I hadn't got the bonus objective for Predator, and he'd done 2 of his, data scan and the heavy infantry on HVT1, and was securing my HVT. Which meant that, come the close, he had 3, 4, 5, he had 6 points, and I had 7. I had 3 for classifieds, 2 for army points, and 2 for lieutenants. So an incredibly close game, 7-6. In a tournament, that would be 4 tournament points to me and 2 to him, which is the most you can score from a loss. And just a really magnificent recovery, like just absolute a man of focus, determination, and sheer fucking will. Very, very well recovered last turn. There's also a lot to be said just in terms of the result around dice both ways. If he had pulled his brawler up with the paramedic shot that hit it rather than it dying, I'd lose. I just would. He'd have, it would be, what would that be? 6-4, 6-5. very close the other way, for example. Had more army points on the board than he did, but again, he had the panoplies, he had his classifieds, etc. So just to round it all out, and then this up, what was interesting? What were the learnings? What were the takeaways? Well, to start with, don't build a list that doesn't have any guns with range better than 16 inches if you can avoid it. You should build tactical flexibility into a list, but equally, it's even in Tohaa, for example. I've got a Tohaa list that is just 2 snipers, 2 HMGs. That's 100% ESWC. It's boring, but also I don't think it's really a good idea. The name of the game, if you can, is to build as many tactical options in as possible. And there are different ways and different angles that you can always take, and Tohaa are exceptional at taking those. This has got me thinking about ways to build Tohaa lists, and I'm increasingly of the opinion that although the Sukrail HMG is a very good piece, and you often should take one, to really be successful with Tohaa, what you want to do is use Eclipse to maneuver and take gunfights either beyond 32 inches with your snipers, because you have very good snipers in Tohaa, or under 16 inches with your K1 combi rifles and your viral combi rifles, and not ever take a fight in a range band that favors your opponent and you at the same time. Tohaa don't have core link bonuses, they don't have great ballistic skill, this is all stuff that we know, but they have unparalleled visibility control. No army can slice the battlefield up and control lines of fire like Tohaa, and they have only gotten better at it thanks to the addition of N4 Mirrorball and the tack whale, the revival of the tack whale lieutenant. So there is a real viable playstyle in Tohaa that is built entirely around taking only the longest and only the shortest range gunfights. But you've got to be able to play both. This was a really interesting thing to get me thinking about that, but it equally exposed the limitations. I never had anything that forced my opponent to cross the board and engage me. I never had a fire base that said, come and deal with this, or I'm going to keep shooting you. And I also never really had anything that would let me take advantage of those longer range lines of fire, longer range shots. So, in short, don't. This is a gimmick. There are some armies that can actually play all short range guns, but even those armies have tools that mitigate that. Like Combined Army, for example, I considered doing Combined Army for this challenge because Plasma is really, really, really good, and Combined Army have got white noise and great smoke throwers. But even in a Combined Army list like that, I would probably want a guided missile launcher. And a guided missile launcher, of course, would break the challenge because it's got a range band longer than a combi rifle. Which is why I didn't go with that. Also think you could do this really well with Hack Islam. You'd have to play Rifle Dalami rather than Panzerfaust Dalami. That's fine. Rifle Dalami are serviceably really quite good. But there's a lot you can do in terms of running with rifles in Hack Islam. The bikers are exceptional, got great impetuous troops, great smoke. The biggest weakness you have in Hack Islam is that you don't have true undeniable visibility control because you only have regular smoke and no white noise. So if your opponent has an MSV, you've got to have a plan for that. Which you do, right? Absolutely. You can multiple impersonators, etc., etc. But even in Hack Islam, you still kind of want a firepower mix just in case you're put in a situation where you've got to fall back on it. If you run purely, unrestrictedly rifle rangeband weapons in Hack Islam, you roll the dice on getting locked out of the game. And they've got great tools to avoid it, but not guaranteed. So anyway, that I think about wraps it up. This was a really fun experience. Not going to run the only 16-inch guns Tohaa again anytime soon, but it's given me a lot to think about, and in particular opened up that sort of play style idea for me that I'm going to experiment with in future. So hope you enjoyed this. Hope you enjoyed some pictures of the army. Hope you enjoyed the battle report. It's come in at a reasonably serviceable, about 50-minute recording. Loss of Lieutenant, again, Australian-based Infinity the Game podcast. They do some great content. They release between every 2 weeks to every month with some really good players, some really wonderful guys. They're the heart of the Melbourne scene, and thank you so much for running this challenge. As always, I do commentated battle reports on TTS. Let me know if you liked this format. Let me know if you'd like to have your games commentated. Super easy to do, super fun. I really enjoy it. And thanks very much for watching.